Perfect. We just gonna start now with the webinar. So I wish everybody a welcome and happy day. I hope you had a great day. So today we're gonna talk about the expense admin side. I also want to apologize for last week that we had to delay the webinar for another week. We have fixed the issues now, and so we are able to start again with the expense admin webinar. And for that reason, I also brought my colleague Maximilian in. He will guide you through the webinar and will show you everything with his expertise. And you have the chance to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen in order to ask any questions. We will then I will then check the questions in the meantime and we'll try to answer them via the chat. As I said before, the recording will be sent out tomorrow if somebody needs to drop off or if somebody is not able to join. And otherwise, I would now hand it over to my colleague Maximilian and wish everyone a great time.
Thanks, Marvin. Thanks for the intro. So, as Marvin has already said, I'm Max. I'm a solutions architect for our expense platform based out of our Berlin office. And I'm happy to walk you through our expense admin side. So, I will start sharing my screen with you now. Where we will start this webinar off is actually on the transaction side of the Navan expense platform. You see on the left part right here, I'm in the expense part of the platform. I have a travel part up here and I have a general configurations part down at the bottom. The transactions tab shows an overview over all of the transactions that have been processed through Navan expense. So this can be credit card spend, it can be spend that has been made on the travel platform, but it can also be out of pocket spend, for example, that has been submitted through the platform. You have a direct identification over what type of spend this is here in the overview. So I can just hover over that little icon and it will tell me if this has been, for example, physical card spend or in this case, if it has been a manual transaction, for example. On the upper part of that overview right here, I have different filters. So I can always go in and filter the transactions either by a merchant, by a certain date, by currency and amounts. I can also filter them by the specific transaction type, and I can go into more filters right here, and then more filter options will appear in those drop-down fields or also in those different checkboxes right here. So if I would choose to search, for example, for a specific flag type, I can just go in here and set that specific filter. I can also save and pin different filter sets. Then, if we go down here, I can switch in between the different clusters of transactions. So our approach with Navan is that we actually show all of the transactions that have been processed through the platform, right? But only a few of them will get flagged for manual review or manual approval because either they have been flagged by a specific policy set or by one of our additional audit checks, for example, right? Checking for duplicates receipts, checking for AI receipts. All of these things will be automatically checked for every submitted transaction, and they will pull up here in that flag transaction tab for an approver or a reviewer now to go in and check and approve or decline on those transactions. I will show you how that looks like in a second, but we will actually go into the other tabs as well just to give an overview. I have an info requested tab right here. So every time that an admin or an approver has requested additional information on an expense submission, these expenses will pull up in that cluster here. The awaiting repayment tab shows transactions where actually a transaction has been declined and the employee has to repay the company. Those transactions will show up in that cluster. If we choose, or if a customer chooses to repay his employees not directly through Navan, but via a payroll export, all of those transactions that have been flagged for being exported to a payroll file will roll up in that tab. Same goes for payroll reimbursements here, for pending transactions and or for declined transactions. In all of those clusters, I can always go in and edit columns here. So if I want to have a different overview or different structure of the data, I can mix and match those views in this tab right here. When I go into the flag transactions, one more thing, you see an export button here at the top. This will allow me to export all of the transactions in that specific cluster in a specific format that I choose. So for example, if I go into a CSV export right now, I can choose the specific template that I have set up to give me the data of those transactions in the specific data format. How does it now look like when I want to approve or, for example, check on a specific transaction? Let's actually pull up one of those transactions right here. So I have a side-by-side slide in view of that transaction, but I can also go into a full transaction view right here, which we will now do. This transaction now, or this expense, shows me all of the additional information that the platform has gathered on that specific expense. So I see the expense type, I see the participants, and I have a fully pre-coded and automatically contextualized data set on that transaction. So I now know which GL code has been assigned to that transaction, which department and cost center, so on and so forth. I also, of course, can check on the receipt picture right here. And I have a few different additional informations, for example, from the credit card terminal on the tax details and on the specific policy sets, for example. When I want to go in and approve or decline that transaction, I have those buttons at the top right here. So it's an approve button, and I can also go in here and request either more information or reject that transaction and request a repayment. I can also assign that transaction to another manager or to another approver. And I also always have the flag informations visible right here. So I do know why a specific transaction has been flagged for review. And based on that information, I can now act and approve or decline, for example, right? When I go into the Show History tab right here, this will now pull up a full audit trail for every transaction for me to then check why a specific transaction has been flagged, who has, for example, approved it, who has rejected it, was there more information that has been asked for. That full audit trail is always visible and can be checked on every time for every transaction. Going into the repayments tab here now, this is showing a status for all of the transactions again that I've already shown you on the transactions tab. All of the transactions that have been rejected, partially or fully, and are now awaiting repayment. Those are shown in that specific tab right here. Let's go into the accounting review tab next, where I can either, if I have set up a direct sync to or to a specific ERP system, this would show up the sync tab right here, but I want to show you something with regards to the tax review tab now. In that accounting review now, if I go into tax review, I have a list of all of the transactions where the tax details are to be confirmed and there's a pending review. So for example, let's check into on that example now. I will see the specific receipt picture right here and the VAT information or the tax information that has been provided by the traveler or by the one submitting the transaction. And I can now either confirm that information or adjust the information, for example. Let's maybe check if we defined an example where there is tax details provided. Here's no information provided as well, but I could now just go in, add that information and click confirm tax for me as an accountant to review on those specific tax details, right? To then approve the transactions and have them ready for an ERP export, for example. Going into the analysis tab now, we'll start off in the spend overview. The spend overview is pulling together and pooling together all of the information and all of the data points that are gathered when people are using our platform. So the spending behavior, the travel behavior, all of the additional data points, like how much money is being spent, by what departments is it spent, all of these different data points. Customers can freely slice and dice by those different attributes right here and those different filters. I can also, of course, export that data and, for example, feed it into an external BI solution. Even though there is a lot of a lot of reporting options already provided out of the box. There will be a dedicated session on the analysis part in the future. So we will keep that very brief and very short, but one or two more things that I actually want to show you. One thing here is the compliance tab. That compliance tab is showing me additional reporting based on how people are using the platform, right? So now I can see, for example, how many transactions have actually been flagged, for how many transactions there are receipts missing, and I get that information on also sliced, for example, by departments, right? And I can now go in and check on those specific behaviors of those departments, check why transactions are being flagged, why are there always receipts missing, to sort of enforce positive behavior in that way, that we do not get that much or that many compliance flags in that case. Going into the trip overview now. Navan is a travel solution, but it is also the expense management solution in one software. So Navan can now provide a full overview over all trips that have been made on the platform. So this is now showing me all of the trips that are being made, and it is showing me, for example, also the spend occurring on those trips. This is travel spend, but it is also expense spend. So I could now, for example, jump in here and see all of the expense submissions that have been made by my colleague Alexandra Warren here on that specific trip. I can now go back in and check on other additional trips. For example, this Austin trip right here. I would see the lodging expenses, I would see the airfare expenses, food expenses, if there has been taxi and rideshare expenses, I see that as well. And I can check that on, for example, a transactional level as well. So I would see all of the Uber expenses, all of the food expenses, all of the travel expenses as well, and have a full trip overview in real time available for my reporting purposes. The next point where I want to touch on are the purchase cards. Navan is able to issue purchase cards directly in the platform and have you manage those cards in the platform as well. Primary use case for that, for these purchase cards would be, for example, software licenses or one-time purchases, things like that. I can issue and manage those cards directly in the platform. So you see here now that I have an overview over all of the available purchase cards in that specific environment right here, and I can manage and, for example, deprovision or reprovision any of those cards, change the limits, change the information on those cards. That's directly possible in the platform. To show you how it looks like when we want to create a new card, I will actually create a new card right here, and um, I get a some additional filters exposed to me right here. So I could either create my own card, I can make it a vendor card, a budget card, a department card, or a one-time use card. Let's just, for the sake of demonstration here, go into create my own card. This will now require me actually to add additional information right here. So I can give the card a name. Let's call it the webinar card. And I can assign an owner now. Let's assign myself. And I would then actually also be able to put in card description. And here I would set those card limits. So this card, for example, now would be a 1,000 euro card and it does not renew. So it's a one-time use card that I can now provision directly in the platform and give out, for example, to have a one-time purchase processed through that card, or I could make it a renewable card, for example, with a 1,000 euro limit on a monthly basis that I can then set up, for example, for certain software licenses. So for your Microsoft licenses, for your AWS licenses, whatever it may be, you can set those cards up to have a payment solution streamlined in Navan. Next point I want to touch on is the budget functionality right here. This functionality in Navan allows me to set up certain budgets from a reporting standpoint. So I could, for example, now go in here. Let's check on that specific budget. And I can set a certain set of filters here. So only to include transactions in that case from the executive or commercial sales, enterprise or mid-market sales department from both specific expense types that you see on the right here. The system will now go and filter through all of the transactions that do match those filters and pool them in this specific budget. This can now be used for all kinds of reporting or transparency use cases. So that I now see in that budget all of the transactions that match those filters. It will actually also, for example, alarm me now when a certain threshold has been met or if a budget is overused, for example. I can always freely go back and repurpose those budgets, reset the filters, create new budgets or delete budgets. This is a really powerful additional reporting capability in that part of the platform. Once we go into statements, we will actually start off with the payments part right here. On the payments part of the platform, I have the available funds shown to me in one of the specific currencies. Navan natively issues in three currencies, which is US dollar, it's British pounds, and it's euro. It can be set up on a legal entity basis, and all of the legal entities will be shown specifically um, in the tab of a specific currency now. I will now see, let's go back into the euro view right here. I will now see what payments have been made and by what legal entity they have been made. If I would now were to make a manual payment to increase the funds that you see on the top right here, I can go into make a manual payment and will then be able, for example, here to choose the entity that I want to make a euro payment on and add a payment amount. So for example, let's now add 10,000 euro. I could click next now and that would start the payment and direct debit process for that specific legal entity that I have just chosen. If I were to make a wire transfer, so make a manual payment and full wire transfer, I can switch on that tab right here, and it will show me the payment information where I would make my wire transfer to. This information will change based on the legal entity. So, for example, I've chosen German entity now, so it's showing me that specific account. It would look different for other legal entities that are tied to different issuing currencies. Again, the filter capabilities, it's similar to what you have seen on the other pages of the expense admin tab. So I could, for example, filter by legal entities, by the status, by the bank accounts, or by whom those payments have been made, by whom those payments have been transferred. Going into statements, what we see in the statements tab. The statements now are done here on a legal entity basis, and they do show all of the transactions that have been made through Navan, either on the travel part of the platform or on the expense part of the platform. So all credit card spend, but also all manual transactions, for example, that have been paid out by Navan to the employee. I can go in here and we'll now have an overview over all of those transactions. I can go back in here and I can now, for example, bulk download all invoices and all receipts that have amounted to that specific statement. I can also export that now as a full activity overview in form of a CSV file, which will now, in that example, for the expense name of France, SAS legal entity right here with 596 euro amounted to the statement. That export would now pull out all of the transactions in a CSV file to show me what transactions have actually made up of a 596 euro in that specific statement. Same goes now for all of the other overviews right here. It's a chronological overview over all of the statement and transactions and payment history that the specific account has on the Navan platform. The next part that I want to touch on here is in the company part, where I can set up settings to actually define and input the legal entity structure, for example. So in that case, when I go into company and settings, I would actually start off with a legal entity part right here. This now shows me an overview over all of the legal entities and the attached bank accounts. I can now go into bank accounts here, for example, and add a new bank accounts to tie to a specific legal entity. I can do that, for example, here with a click on the bottom add account. Um, Going out of that overview now, we can, there's one last thing that I want to show you here on the configuration tab, on the organization tab. I want to show you how it looks like to store that additional information to define the legal entity now. In the organization tab, I have a split through legal entities, offices, cost centers, departments, regions, subsidiaries. And I have an overview over all of the information that has already been added. So, for example, I can now check in on the information for the expense demo Australia legal entity, for example. I can go in and edit that information. Same goes for all of the other entities in that example. And I would add new legal entities in that specific tab right here. Same goes now, for example, for the offices. So if I would have to enter a new office location, I can do that here with a click of a button and add the new office information. I can also see the assigned users to a specific um, to a specific office location. And I can also, of course, now filter for those users. So if I want to check if a certain user has been assigned to a certain office, that's one of the possibilities that I have right here. In the cost center department, same story. I can add a new cost center right here, and I could also check on the assigned users to a specific cost center in that case. Same goes for the departments, for the regions, and for the subsidiaries. This information is all, and the whole tab is open to every customer, so every customer can add and customize that information by themselves. Mm. One last thing now to go into the user tab. Mm, okay, this user list now is showing all of the users that have been added and synced through to the platform. So in that specific demo environment now, I would see that 95 users have been registered on that platform, and I see the additional status of them and the additional attributes that have been synced or set up when uploading the user list. I will actually show you what my user on that specific platform looks like. I see my user here and I also see the status. So it's an enabled user, it's a registered user. I see the specific travel roles of that user. So I'm an admin and I'm also a delegate. And I see the different access options here as well as the expense role. And if I would have, or now that I do have a card with Navan as well, a physical card, I can check on the status of that card, if it has been allowed, if it has been declined, if it has been sent out, for example. And that these additional attributes right here that are tied to my specific user in the environment. So my department, my manager, my approver, and those additional cost center company region informations. That information is used for reporting purposes, but it is also used to flesh out different policies. For example, how much money can be spent in a specific department or by a specific cost center. If you want to set up those policies in the platform to flag or review specific transactions, we will use those attributes to push users into the correct policy brackets. I could now also download user lists from here, or I can manually add a user list right here. For example, via a CSV upload, or via just manually adding user information. All right. This was brief overview now over the expense admin part of our platform. I Hope you got a good overview. And this was informational. Again, the recording of that session will be sent out by tomorrow. I hope everybody enjoyed the session, and I wish you all a great rest of your day. Thank you.